Well, now when it comes to Drake and Kendrick Lamar, well, now if you were trying to see how lame old Karen himself is trying to publicly diss Kendrick Lamar again and is begging for another round of beef for some reason, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and you're not going to want to miss this one, because really, as Karen and the Hortio detectives have finally managed to make a complete sentence, Drake is now trying to run around like he is this lyrical genius, mastermind, supervillain. And there was always this bigger plot with Kendrick Lamar that may all end up in something much bigger now than we could have ever expected. And now really, as the Drake fans want to believe that the guy who made The Hard Part 6 is some sort of a lyrical genius and who predicted the future and all of these different things that were going to happen, I'm not wasting time today. I'm not trying to be funny. We just going to go head on into these things today and debunk what's really going on. Which, with that, once again, I'm just going to say make sure you leave that like, because they are going to be getting emotional about this, because really what's so interesting when it comes to Drake now is that between all of the pathetic meltdowns and petty crash outs that we have been seeing over and over again, is that within this now, Drake has liked multiple posts from some fan theories that are pretty much trying to now push the fact that based on where we are at in the lawsuit with Drake and his label, well, based on some lyrics and Family Matters, this was all connected. And Drake is like some sort of a Gandalf the Great Yoda or some wise figure like that who was straight up able to look into the future and knew exactly what was coming once and for all. And now what the most media illiterate people are trying to tell us about media literacy now all comes down to in Family Matters towards the end of the track, where Drake was trying to sing about how Kendrick Lamar needed a management team to hide on the fact that he did some awful stuff that he didn't actually do because there's been nothing to prove it. Well, within that, and based on Drake's word choice, he seemingly knew that there was going to be this whole scheme with bots and not like us and all of these other things, as he seemingly name dropped an LLC called Nowhere to Hide. Which now what they are trying to tell us about this is that the LLC is apparently registered to the man named Kojo, who keeps coming up in this case and who Drake is trying to bring in to ask some questions. And so now, first off, before we even get into the actual merit of this, while people think that this is Kojo's LLC, despite Drake saying this and people trying to think that Nowhere to Hide is Kojo's company, what it's starting to look like this is a false registry. And it does not actually fall under what Kojo works with and owns. And so first off, I just want to note that when people say that Drake has this crystal ball and he is this master lyricist who really wrote words that we are just finding out the meaning of, again, when you're not obsessed with the rap megaverse, you can't just find out from facts that what he is saying and what he is trying to push now is not just a lie. But if we actually take Drake on his word and dive into the meaning of what this would implicate, it gets more insane than you could have ever imagined. And let's just break it down, because ultimately with Drake saying this and his fans believing that this is all connected now, what Drake is actually saying that he always knew was happening was that Drake knew that there was going to be a diss track that would be made that would allow his reputation to sink to an all-time low. It would then devalue him within the label system, and then it will all be a part of this grand setup that he had no control over. Yet he knew every single detail of it. But despite knowing every single detail of this plan, he would still let its impact affect him for over a year and just completely rewrite and change the outcome of where hip-hop was at. And I already know how ridiculous that sounds, but stay with me here because it's going to get worse. Because now, ultimately, if this is true, what we are seeing is that ever since Kendrick Lamar dropped Not Like That, again, according to what the lame old Elberries think, Drake knew that this entire beef was a setup, yet he decided to engage in push-ups and act like he was just in any other rap beef, in terms of going against other MCs in lyrical competition. And then we're supposed to believe that Drake doubled down on all of these disses against other rappers on Family Matters. And then after that, when Kendrick Lamar did release the track that he seemingly knew was going to be a part of this conspiracy to boost streams and ruin him, he then in response dropped The Hard Part 6. And to be honest, where this all falls apart more than ever is The Hard Part 6. Because really, this was when Drake pulled the rabbit out of his hat and tried to make this whole cover-up about lying with the daughter and the information and all that. That really just soiled his reputation and showed how scared he was of this entire feud. And again, when you just remember what actually happened in this beef and remember at least few of the 50 songs that Drake has put out since then, you will start to realize how ridiculous this all is and how incomprehensible of a strategy this will be. Because seriously, if you're gonna sit here and tell me that Drake is this genius and yet he made a track like The Hard Part 6 to cover up how bad he messed up in this beef, instead of revealing how this entire beef was this plot from the industry to ruin him, what are we even doing here? Because at the end of the day, if Drake would have actually had a plan and knew that this was all happening and this wasn't just some BS, that would have literally changed the course of music. But again, this just didn't happen and nothing close to it did. And this is just all a sham. Because again, if you're on this OVO side of people and you think that this whole thing was a setup and that Drake knew it was coming all along, To really try and convince yourself of a conspiracy theory where Drake let himself intentionally ruin every single thing he has ever stood for an entire year and more at this point as a part of some big plan where he was going to win. If you believe this, it's time to stop caring about Drake because you have just went too far. Because again, nobody has ever allowed all of this damage to be done to their reputation. And I don't care what you say, there is no single self-respecting person in the history of anything that has ever done something quite like this. And I don't care how you want to look at it, you're really not going to sit here with a straight face and try to act like this is the case. And listen, while Drake is trying to act like a genius right now and he's liking all these posts that are showing that he's known everything that is going on all along, and he literally said that he is the real boogeyman compared to Kendrick Lamar for it. First off, the best part is Drake is still trying to do all of this baiting and play all of these other games while never mentioning Kendrick's name once. But in reality, I think once again, Drake has just gotten lucky and he is excited that his own fans are in the gutter enough to believe that something this ridiculous is even true.
Because really, when you break down the entire Drake ideology and the way he has created music for the last decade at least, what it shows is that Drake is not skilled and calculated whatsoever, and he definitely does not have this crystal ball where he can see the future. But what really was seen on For All the Dogs and Scary Hours 3, and then in this beef in a lot of ways in terms of the writing, is that what Drake has partaked in and what he has used to even get himself to have moments where his fans are trying to gas up something that he just didn't plan out whatsoever is a term that I'm going to coin here called diss slop. And now what I mean by this is that with the way Drake has rapped and created music, he's always talking back to somebody and yelling about something where he's angry. But at the same time, 99% of the material is always so vague that when you look back at it in context of what we understand in the present, well, if you're not one of the people who thinks that this guy is bigger than Michael Jackson, a better rapper than Jay-Z, and a better complainer in court than Saul Goodman, you think he is an absolute genius. But that's just not the case. Because again, when we look at something like Scary Hours, I think a really good example of this is with the track Stories for My Brother, for example. This is a really good telling of what this diss slop from Drake really is. Because when Drake has that whole section of the track where he closes it out and says that you are not Kobe Bryant to us, well, now I'm looking back on it based on the relationships and beefs that have turned out and flipped over for Drake after this thing dropped. People now want to say that this is about Kendrick Lamar at one point because of the whole West Coast connection and everything to Kobe Bryant there. But then people also say it's about LeBron James because of course LeBron is a Laker and a basketball player and he has beef with Drake. And in terms of not knowing anything and not knowing the context, well, just loosely it does kind of fit. And again, while Drake fans will try to say it's about Kendrick or LeBron when you know that Kendrick was at Drake's shows and then he was friends with LeBron leading up to this, this was not about either of them most likely, and it was probably about somebody else altogether, or it was just a vague line that he put in there and meant absolutely nothing. And now, so seeing how this is associated with people that are in beefs with Drake now, yet they weren't in beefs with him back then, that's how this whole thing works. And again, with the track Red Button, where Drake is rapping about how there was this industry conspiracy and everybody's against him and all these other ridiculous and delusional thoughts, well again, with this track, all of the losers tried to act like Drake knew the Kendrick beef was planned out and coming, and there was always going to be this big setup. But then again, when you know that Drake asked Kendrick to be on this album and like that was a surprise, this is just not true. So when we look at this and then to see this Kojo line where everybody is trying to act like Drake really knew what he was saying here, I don't believe any of it. And unless there is any sort of better proof that can show us once that Drake has actually been calculated and has understood things not for just diss slop, but actually in a way where he is letting on to something bigger, I think all of this is just how Drake continues to manipulate the most gullible of people, and it amounts to absolutely nothing. And really, so with this, why this is important right now is because there is this narrative within the Drake community, which is reaching everywhere, and hip-hop as a whole, that the beef that happened may have actually been a little different than we thought, and that Drake may have known more than he actually let on. And now, while it's clear that if Drake is talking like this, he does want to revisit Kendrick Lamar, or at least wants to entertain the idea of everything that went down, well again, as Drake has done all of this and is still subbing Kendrick but has not mentioned his name, I'm sure he does not actually want anything directly with him. But to be honest, hopefully the fans and Drake's own patheticness just get him back to this point. Because listen, if this happens, all Kendrick Lamar is going to have to do is literally just press a button and release that next diss track that he never gave us. And I'm sure we'll get another hit song or an all-time great rapping cut out of it. And if this is what it has to take to get new Kendrick Lamar music, well, listen, I don't care how much Drake keeps baiting him. If we get more Kendrick out of this, it's going to be a big win for rap. And Lubri is just going to continue to be the lamest person of all time. And so now, with all this said, let me know, what do you think about Drake trying to act like he knew more about the Kendrick beef than he ever actually did? And what do you think about how he's trying to revise history and bait Kendrick Lamar to beef with him again? I can't wait to hear what you have to say about all this. Now, if you made it to this point in the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. That helps me out a ton. And now, if you want to see how right before this, well, Drake just had one of his most pathetic rants on stage ever, and it truly got worse than we have even seen the last time, because Drake is just not even making sense anymore with what he is complaining about. Check out the suggested video.